So I'm Tim Webb. I'm the Sustainability Standards Network Manager for the British Standards Institute. I'm also Director of the National Park City Federation and of London Parks and Gardens Trust. And I'm also Secretary of the UK Urban Ecology Forum. We're here today to discuss ESG strategies and whether it should be a core element of everybody's business. And I think we'll just go around and have a quick panel introduction.
Hello there. I am Dr. Mandeep Kaur Rai Dhillon, the author of The Values Compass, what 101 countries teach us about purpose, life, and leadership. It's everywhere I go, so excuse me for showing it to you. In my former lives, well, also current, I am a journalist. I have a column on Forbes, CEO World, Thrive Global, work with the BBC, with Reuters, CNN, and many others. Set up the first venture capital fund in the Middle East, medium venture capital fund across the MENA region. What else can I tell you? MBA, PhD, etc. But most importantly, within ESG, advise and work with several companies where ESG is at the forefront. And we're taking ESG into COP27 in a big way.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ivano Iannelli. I'm currently the Senior Advisor on Sustainability and ESG to the CEO of Emirates Global Aluminium, the world's largest premium aluminium manufacturer. I was the CEO of Dubai Carbon, the CO2 emission regulator for Dubai, and the greenhouse gas inventory advisory that captured CO2 streams from an economic perspective and a reporting perspective for all GCC countries for the past decades. I started my career as a United Nations official. I'm a development economist by background, and currently pursuing my PhD in carbon markets. Having said that, it feels like a very intimate panel, and if we may kick things off, I have a question for you guys. We've seen how the ESG story evolved from CSR to sustainability, now in a very more analytical and stringent framework. But where do you think this should sit within an organization, and why, considering that the ESG represent three pillars: the environment, the social, and the governance? Not sure about you, but I'm having my limitations placing it within the environment unit, where it's commonly found.
Well, firstly, I'd like to say, Ivano, you and I have a lot in common. I also have a background in development economics. And it's interesting that you should put it into the environmental bracket. I think that in many cases that is the case. I don't think corporate social responsibility, having worked within corporate social responsibility, I've also worked with the UN, and I've also worked in private institutions. So for example, when working in investment banking, I used to do a lot with corporate social responsibility. And I feel as though that would almost sideline ESG. ESG is front and center. And I have to say that although you have rightly said it's environmental, social, governance, it's also without values, without people, ESG almost doesn't make sense. So you need a combination, and you need to make sure that within organizations that actually it is seen as being important for all stakeholders, not just that our objective should not just be shareholder maximization, that we should be thinking about every part of the ecosystem. And therefore, equally, ESG, if it was sidelined in a department such as CSR, you would be almost belittling what this is. This should be front and center. And I find that more and more, our younger talent are well aware of that and put it where it belongs, both in their minds, how the companies that they choose, and in terms of how important it is to them as part of their mission and purpose.
I'd agree with Mandeep there. I think it is something that younger generations have really adopted and are running with. But to answer your question, I think it runs throughout an organization, top to bottom, bottom to top. If you haven't got the buy-in from the people who are leading an organization, then others are really going to struggle to follow through. So it is essential that everybody involved is backing this all the way. I mean, if you think of the right, let's go right back to the shareholders. ESG investment globally was something like 11.35 trillion in 2012, when the world was very simple and everybody was happy. We had the Olympics and it was amazing, and everything was beautiful. ESG investment is now forecast to reach 53 trillion by 2025. It shot up in 2019, partly because of the Black Lives Matter movement, but also because of COVID. People suddenly realized that the model we had wasn't working. We needed something new, and this is it.
Well, very, very interesting. And again, mine was more of a provocation than a statement, and I appreciate but for me, it's exactly the same. I mean, I hated when I saw how CSR would be parked with marketing departments. I hated when I saw sustainability parked within the environment departments. And now that I'm looking at strategy pre- and post-IPO and the relevance of ESG scoring, I'm finding out that it should be very much within strategy, if not even finance. And again, these are both very different domiciles for ESG from where you're currently finding them. But if you take an organization as big as the one I'm representing, you will see that pre-IPO, you achieve an ESG rating based on the communication, the disclosures that people find. And this might not even be commissioned by you. It could be an investment fund that wants to participate. It could be someone willing to invest in the same company. It could be a competitor that pays a rating agency to assess my ESG risk, controversy, stress test against climate change legislation, so forth, so on. So it's very often misunderstood that what we say or don't say has a direct impact on how our company is perceived. Hence, my focus on placing it within strategies. And again, I always find it very difficult to explain this to others, simply because they see it as a natural sequence from the environment side, which unfortunately takes the lion's share of the acronym. Having said that, I really think that it's transforming itself. We do see a lot of focus, and I see that the trends that Tim was highlighting are very real, very tangible. Tim, in your opinion, what have you seen as the way ESG is changing and it's being adopted to be ESG tomorrow, say?
You're right. It started off with the environmental side of things, and then the social aspect kicked in. Then people started to see the economic benefits that those changes were having. So there was a sort of natural progression, if you like, I think. The evidence is there to encourage more people to adopt these sorts of behaviors. But I think it's the economic evidence that is driving that change now, rather than the other two. The other two are almost coincidental, but they're brilliant. Who wouldn't want to work for a company that respects the environment and its workers?
Yeah, off the back of that, I would just say the environment isn't the environment anymore. It is front, right, left, and center. We have seen that each and every one of us is responsible. We used to think that the governments were responsible. Then it was in the hands of business. But more and more during the pandemic, as our lifestyle and as our lives have shifted, we are having to take personal responsibility. And if we do that, then we take it in terms of who we purchase from, where our services come from, who we choose as customers, who we choose to be employed by, and how we choose to live. And so each of those decisions are putting pressure on our organizations to make sure that ESG is front and center.
I'm also a negotiator for the UAE. I'm part of the negotiation team. So I do attend the COPs, and I'm part of those of the teams that have to go and spend weeks deciding on, and literally 3 lines of text to be implemented. But we do have to recognize the fact that we are where we are because of the Paris Agreement, because the Paris Agreement did kick off on January 1st last year, and now we're starting to feel the cascading effect. And there is a big benchmark, which will be COP28, which will take stock, not only because it will be held here in the UAE, but it will take stock of every country's plans and will map the trajectory towards 2050, which is where countries have committed to slash their emissions. But having said this, I do feel that we spent some major time in pandemic mode, and it was our ability to change and transform that got us through it, or is getting us through it, to be correct. So this is done from the governance and the social side as well. It's not only environment. We cannot focus on of having a single stream. As an example, in a diverse and inclusive board, the type of company policies will be more receptive to new thematic areas. If we work with our suppliers, with our stakeholders, we will have an easier way to transform. And again, we're going through another major crisis, an energy crisis, due to the conflict, to the ongoing conflict. And again, we're asked just to adapt again to a new approach. And unfortunately, it goes back to where you started. Because of the energy crisis, now they're considering coal power plants yet again, which I personally find really, really bad. But how do we pursue a policy of ESG relevance in this environment is by disclosures, by showing that, say, my company will not buy power from there, you buy it, or things of this nature. I don't know how you guys see this, but again, I'm compelled to see diversity, inclusion in corporate management, but at the same time, I wouldn't have an easy answer for the energy crisis, which is ongoing.
I grew up working on farms and then moved into journalism, bit of a strange move, before ending up in conservation. But I spent something like 20 years on projects to save different species, house sparrows or coastal realignment projects. At the end of those 20 years, we were no further forward. We were still losing biodiversity. Our coast was still being eroded. All of that effort, all of that time, all of that investment, it had made a bit of a difference, but it isn't making the sort of difference on the scale we need, which is why I've sort of moved over into the world I'm now in and end up at sort of World Urban Forums in Abu Dhabi and places like that. What we do need are partnerships between all sectors. And we do have to consider things like nuclear power, but that can bring some benefits. Designing nuclear power stations now that can also be desalination plants, provide clean water, which is going to be essential in the future. So I think partnerships are one of the key things that I would push as a way forward. They're going to be very key going forward, and cross-sectoral partnerships at that.
This is not what I was going to say, but given what you've just said, Tim, I couldn't agree with you more. I do think that nuclear energy, a tiny reactor can actually solve the planet's energy problems quite quickly and easily. The power, and we're always concerned of the safety angle, but actually that is stuck in people's memories and needs to be eradicated, because the amount of benefits and the safety provisions that are in place now are phenomenal. So I just think a little bit more education there is needed, and a little bit more trust and giving that a go. It's interesting, Ivano, that you're sitting in the UAE and that COP28 will happen there. And the vision that the UAE, which they always do, I write about it in the book, of the kind of visionary angle that the UAE always takes to, COPs will be in Sharm el Sheikh this year in Egypt, but the way the UAE will do this will be radically different, and with a sense of how do we want the planet to look in the future in mind. And I find that each and every country's values actually play a big part in how we look at ESG. So without that values component, really, I'm not sure we do bring it front and center. When the G20, when the most powerful, 20 most powerful nations on the planet who do 80% of the trade are talking, they are talking with values, the environment, the youth, etc., all in mind. And I think that's really important, because we're really looking at not just, to your point, Tim, of spending 20 years working upon something. Well, we're looking at the next 80 years of our children's and grandchildren's lives. So there is no choice but to chip away at it each and every day. And yes, partnership is absolutely important. But I think the willingness of governments is very much there. So whether it's signed or not by China or India, etc., is not really the point. The point is how is it being adopted by each and every organization, each and every person? Because, for example, when you have school children that are discussing what or wasn't signed, but the fact that they're not going to be willing to go on a flight with their family, and therefore they're not going to increase their carbon footprint, or they're going to make sure that their homes are plastic free, or they're going to make sure that they're tiny, but it speaks volumes, and all of it makes a huge difference. If I look at how the next generation, my children and everyone else included, is looking at their lifestyle choices because of the environment, it is front center.
And again, I couldn't agree more with the both of you. Partnerships is for me also pivotal to all this. And just to bring a brief parenthesis, I love the narrative of Expo legacy being linked just to COP28. So again, this is where we should shine. We do not have just buildings there. We have heritage that we can continue to bring forward. And literally, this beautiful narrative should allow others to converge towards a central theme. ESG could be this theme. And obviously, we want to see, bolder aspirations make their way through corporate boardrooms. The reason I asked the specific question of whether we would place it is somewhat metaphorical. We are looking to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from power, from industry, from transportation. But none of us likes to walk outside of the comfort zone. So as far as we know, the same applies also in the corporate environment. And this is where the three of us can make a difference by translating ambition in corporate terms. For example, I'm using sustainability scoring, ESG ranking and scoring, to showcase the difference pre and post IPO. So pre-IPO, I can achieve a rating which is based on all my policies. Post-IPO, a company can only use publicly disclosed policies and data for their rating. And in certain cases can bring you all the way from the top to the medium of the pack. And just look, for example, at Tesla being ranked lower than BP as an example. I'm not sure if you had any experience or exposure to ESG ratings so far, but I can tell you it's a rating agency. Is exactly the same.
Well, I have to beg to differ. Firstly, I work actually with a ratings organization, and I find companies like Permutable and others are doing a lot to look at how Fortune 500, or in fact all companies, how they're doing in terms of ESG. And it's really important to CEOs, chairmen, stakeholders, shareholders, as to how they're doing. It's not just a rating, it's actually fundamental to whether they're invested in, fundamental to how consumers feel about them, fundamental to even how the employees feel. So I don't see it as a sideline. And I think that people are willing to take changes and to make steps that make them feel uncomfortable. Even 20 years ago, I remember covering how villages in Ladakh and Leh and that far up in the Himalayas had banned plastic. The kind of speciality there is apricot jam. And they wouldn't give you a plastic bag to make sure that when you travel home with the apricot jam that it doesn't spill all over your clothes. They would only give you a cloth bag. That was 20 years ago that I covered that. So people have made changes, are making changes, and will continue to do so until this is addressed. We ensure that bottles are glass bottles. That we don't say, well, there's really no alternative, we're just going to have to stick with plastic. Not at all. And that plastic, if it is found, is immediately recycled. Or if you get on a plane, you're able to pay and make sure that your carbon footprint is covered in some other way, so that there's some kind of trade off there. I'm not saying we don't have a long way to go. Of course we do. But there are things we could do right now that are available to us and that are being done. So I don't think we have any excuses. We just really need to take the change, make the change, be the change, and take the steps that can be taken.
I have very mixed feelings about ratings and league tables and that sort of monitoring. I appreciate it is necessary in many cases, and it does help show that we are progressing. And if you're not measuring, how can you show progress? But I worry that some people might get a bit held up by the whole league table aspect of things. And really what you're looking to do is have a happy, stable workforce that is fully supportive of equality and integration, that is working in the best interests of all involved. I don't know, we mentioned earlier about nuclear power as well. I just really wanted to go back to that briefly. There's still big issues around waste, obviously, which we didn't mention, but I'm sure we would all agree on. Where's the investment? Where's the incentive, though, for people to move on to other systems, other sources of energy? We've got all the ground pumps and solar and hydropower. We've got all of that technology, but it's not really being rolled out at the rate it should be. There's still a lack of drive, I think, from our governments, who really should be pushing a lot harder on all of these things. I feel as though it's being left to business, commerce, corporates, and communities to try and sort things out and to finance it themselves. Which is that the way forward? Should we leave it to the market? And if we do leave it to the market, then we're back to those tables and ratings, because we'll need those to measure the progress. It is hugely complex. I'm not sure where I stand on the ratings, but I'm willing to put up with them because they are showing how we're doing.
Tim, I think you have a great point. And again, just to add a quick element to it, I feel exactly like you do. The only difference is, having gone through thousands of ESG and sustainability reports, I tend to focus on what is omitted or how and where disclosures are placed. Whereas our colleagues may just take it at face value and try to see what their company are disclosing. And this is probably where standards, approaches, platforms, ratings offer this comparability and benchmarkability, which I personally feel it's missing. I don't like a sustainability report just to be storytelling. Hey, I'm Italian, I love storytelling. But I also want the ability to just put it side by side, being able to see who's doing what. And just like Mandeep was saying, capitalize on these fantastic small examples that set the bar just a little bit higher and push the same segment, the same industry to do the same and challenge each other. In my specific area, we run behavioral science projects to assess what works in energy demand. In Dubai, it wasn't price, it wasn't the environment, it was an element of social, but it wasn't just being a good corporate citizen social. It was your neighbor is better than you. So the same way, if I am in an industry and I know that my competitor is better than me, that might create that proverbial hitch that will push you to improve. And again, I personally think that this is also what Mandeep was suggesting, was to push companies, give them a spotlight to showcase their successes.
Partnerships, yeah, storytelling. I'll go with you. Let's all follow the Italian example and really start telling our stories and pointing out all the good bits. Maybe that is enough to drive a partnership.
No, thank you for that. And I would also say the world is changing, and things that were not thought of yesterday are happening today with with much more ease. Take, for example, those of us that remember in 2012, when the European Union rolled out the carbon tariff on aviation. The entire aviation industry fought it harshly against the EU. The European Union today, actually last week, approved the carbon border adjustment mechanism. So now company importing cement, steel, aluminum, hydrogen, fertilizers will have to pay for their carbon emission of their product the same way their European counterparts are. So countries outside of the European trading scheme are now influenced by this. And as an example, when you have to invest such huge capitals in compliance regimes, you have two choices. Should I write a check, or should I invest this money in my own asset? Having said this, I think we've reached the end of our panel. I would like for each one of us to give our 1-2 minutes ending speech and see how we can contribute to ESG for the others. Mandeep, would you do the honor of being the first one?
Sure. Just to finish off the point of partnerships, I find that whether it's non-governmental organizations, for example, the Prince's Trust, which works both domestically and internationally, it really does look at how can it work with, it looks at placing young people in green jobs. And it does so by partnering with, one, the companies that are providing the jobs or could provide the jobs, and two, the governments that they're operating in, each and every one of those governments. And then three, non-governmental organizations or charities or, so these partnerships are being created. And I think that's the only way to build a sustainable model going forward. So when you see that in the mobility industry, that those type of initiatives taking place, or when you see partnerships taking place, or when you see, I mean, maybe it's just the fact that I work so much with young people. When you see the impact that's happening right now, I do think that we can be encouraged by it and learn from it, so that we're constantly thinking of a values, an environmental, a societal, and a governance structure that is intertwined and uplifting us into a world where our lungs are breathing clean, fresh air, and we're drinking good, clean water. Basic needs, but oh so important.
I think my message would be do follow best practice, but not necessarily from your own sector. There's a lot of information out there, and it's easy to adapt to your own business, your own line of work. One other thing I think I put in there is, if you are considering mitigation for any sort of offsetting or that sort of thing, really think carefully about that, because there are a lot of schemes out there that claim to offer brilliant mitigation. A lot of them don't long term. You need something that is going to give you a long-term return. Otherwise, it's pointless. It's a waste of effort and time, and ultimately, it's not sustainable. So maybe even from a management perspective, management mitigation could include maybe just donating some of your expertise and time to a charity that would really benefit, or to a community that would benefit. It needn't be planting a tree. Think beyond what you see every day in the news, and just do keep track of best practice. There's a lot of it there, and there's some amazing stuff coming from around the world right now.
Thank you. And from my side, the same. Being carbon markets, legislation and compliance, my core area, I do always focus on the concept of baseline and decarbonize. So in many cases, we take things for granted, but we really have to try to understand, are we removing carbon emissions from the actual profile? Are we using less resources? Resources are precious, limited, yet our ability to consume them apparently unlimited in many other ways. So it's at the end left to us to try to be more conscious of our interaction with the world. And even though I always prefer to look at it from an economic point, I do believe that we need to push each other to improve. Well, thanks to the panelists, thanks to everyone. This has been really fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.